go. Oh, hello, everybody. I suppose you're out there just talking to my screen. Colin, Jonathan, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure.
All right. Well, today is kind of a kickoff of talking about our Old English program at the Ancient Language Institute. This is been kind of a dream for a long time, is getting direct method Old English instruction happening at the Ancient Language Institute. And Colin, you are helping dreams come true. So why don't you just share a little bit about kind of what you've got planned for Old English coming up this spring and into the future?
So what I've been working on over the past 6 months or so is a way into Old English that learns from all of the great experience that we've had learning and teaching ancient languages such as Latin, such as ancient Greek, such as Biblical Hebrew, which is to incorporate the sort of the nature method or the direct method. You know, everyone's got a different name for it, but basically, it's taking these languages that are historical and treating them as living languages, and so we learn them through gradual, scaffolded, comprehensible input, and that's the book that I've written for this class.
Awesome. And so before we get into the book, which is what we're going to be mostly doing today, you're going to be leading Jonathan and I through a little kind of mini lesson, walking through the book. So people watching will get to see the raw, unpublished stuff that ancient language students will get to read through and work through with you. And so we're going to get to that in a few minutes. But before we talk too much about the book, what's kind of the game plan? Let's say someone is ready to go. What can they expect? You know, starting this spring, our spring term starts in the week of January 8th. And so they would do 14 weeks in kind of Old English 101, and then 102, 201 on into the future. Not hard details, but kind of the general trajectory as it exists in your mind, at least.
So the general trajectory would be the very first Old English course would be 15 weeks going through this book, this Lingua Anglica Antiqua per se Illustrata. English sprach selvliche jerekenodu in Old English. Essentially, we go through and we spend all of our time in this book in Old English. There is little to no modern English in this book. It tells a simple story, chapter by chapter, increasing gradually in complexity, introducing new vocabulary and new grammatical constructions. And so we'll spend 14 weeks going through 14 chapters, one chapter a week, until we've reached the sort of halfway point of the eventual full book. So currently only the first half of the book is written, but the course that we're charting is two terms worth of this book, where we go through and we read a story about a charming bear and his adventures in Anglo-Saxon England and all the sort of crazy antics that he encounters and that he comes up with, and then we move into adapted original texts. The idea is to get as quickly from the ground, from nothing, to being able to read the kind of things that you want to read in Old English. And I think for a lot of people, that would be things like heroic poetry, things like Beowulf. And so the general course is to get to adapted texts like Beowulf as soon as possible. So after about 2 terms of reading the scaffolded nature method textbook.
Okay, great. Let's then get into the book. If this is what students are going to would be spending 2 terms with, as you guys will see, it's you need an introduction to the vocabulary and grammar of Old English. It might be English, but it's not the English you speak. And that will be very evident in mine and Jonathan's stumbling through this lesson for which we have not prepared. So we are truly beginners to Old English. So you're getting an authentic view into that.
Yeah, I can hardly believe we're about to put this on the internet. 0 seconds studying Old English until now.
Yeah, before we dive into the lesson, Colin, maybe just like a couple words about nature method textbooks, the inspiration for this one, and without too many spoilers, sharing a little bit about it.
For those who haven't encountered one of these nature method textbooks before, essentially my model for this is Lingua Latina per se Illustrata, Oerberg's amazing, magnificent work, which takes you from the very basics into the ability to read adapted Latin texts in 28 chapters. And so I wanted to do the same thing for Old English, and that's what I set about doing. The idea is that you're going to be reading fully in the target language, in this case, Old English, and that you're going to be quickly accumulating a store of vocabulary, which is presented in contexts that make it quite clear what the vocabulary is without having to resort to an English, a modern English translation. And so you go through an engaging story, hopefully engaging. I've tried to dial up the drama on this thing. And in doing that, you're so wrapped up in the story that you're starting to get your reps on these vocabulary items almost without noticing it, and then suddenly these words just sort of pop into your head when you want to use them, and the grammatical constructions start to look kind of intuitive. And this is what people report doing the Latin program. LLPSI. You may have seen Familia Romana. That's the first book in the series. And this is what we hope to replicate here with Old English.
Fantastic. So yeah, as I think there's been only 2 people in the world who have worked through this book as a student at all before this moment, one of whom is harassing us in the live chat. He's a ALI teacher. As for the book, like I said, this is kind of the first go that students will be working with. So it doesn't have, the fun little watercolors in the margins like Oerberg's Lingua Latina does yet. It doesn't exist in physical form. It's just files on your computer. And so we're really, this is the ground floor of the thing. And so that's what we're getting to experience. So let's take a look at it, and yeah, let's do an Old English lesson.
All right.
Where's at the Harley? Where's at the Harley, friend? Hello, friends.
Where's at the Harley?
God. This is se forma capital. Se forma capital. Uton onginnon. Let's begin. On Englalande. On Englalande is sum holt. And what is holt? What is holt?
Holt.
This is holt. Holt.
Holt.
And Sumholt is on Englalande. Where is Englaland? Where is Englaland? Englaland is land med Kynninge. Is land med Kynninge. Kynninge Charles. Gise Kynning.
Kynning.
Say Kynning.
Keening.
Kynning, where habbath Kynning Charles on Englalande. Englaland. Englaland is land. Englaland. God.
Engleland on Englelande.
Englaland is land, and there is hold. There is some hold on Englalande. On Englalande. Some hold is on Englalande. On Englalande. God. And what is on Holte? What is on Holte? On Holte. On Holte is sum bera. On Holte is sum bera.
Bera.
Bera. This is bera. Bera. What is on tham Holte? Sum bera is on Holte. Bera on Holte. God. And se bera hatte Oswald. Se bera hatte Oswald. Oswald is his nama. Min nama is Oswald. Easy. His nama is Oswald. Oswald bera. Oswald bera is on Holte. On Holte. God. Se bera hatte Oswald. Se bera hatte Oswald, and Oswald is his nama.
Hotte?
Hatte. 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 Se bera hatte Oswald. Oswald bera wunath. He wunath on Holte. He wunath on Holte. He wunath. What is wunath? His hus. Hus is on Holte. For tham wunath he on Holte. He wunath on Holte. His hus is on Holte. God. He wunath on Holte. God. Und wunath Oswald on huse.
Wunath Oswald on huse.
On huse.
Huse.
Wunath Oswald on huse. Nese. Nese wunath he on huse. Ne wunath he on huse ak on Holte. Pep pep. Ne wunath he on huse ak on Holte. He is bera. He is bera. He wunath on Holte.
Bera.
On Holte. Beran wunath on Holte.
Holte.
On Holte.
On Holte. On huse.
Each wunie on huse. Ryan, thu wunast on huse. Jonathan, thu wunast on huse. Ak beran, ak ne wuniath beran on huse. He wuniath on Holte.
Ich wunath? Ich wunath?
Thu wunast, each wunie.
Ich wunie on huse.
On huse. God. 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 Well, sidest thu. Ryan will sidest thu Jonathan. Well said. God. And where wunath Oswald bera? Jonathan, where wunath he?
On holte.
He wunath on holte. Sodliche. He wunath on holte.
On Englande.
He wunath ak on Englalande. He wunath on holte, and the holt is on Englalande.
Nej.
Gise.
Oh.
Gise. Sodliche. He wunath on holte. Gise. And hwa wunath on holte, Ryan? Hwa wunath on holte?
Oswald wunath on holte.
Oswald wunath on holte. Sodliche. Oswald wunath on holte. Vitodliche wunath Oswald bera there. He wunath there. Where? On holte. And Jonathan, what is Oswald? What is Oswald?
Oswald bera is.
Oswald is bera. Oswald is bera. God.
Bera.
God. Well sidest du. Oswald is bera. God.
On
And-
Englalande.
On Englalande
Englalande.
Is- ak. On Englalande is holt. And on Englalande is ak som tun. Tun.
Tun.
What is tun? Tun is för manie hus sindon. Manie hus sindon on tune. Beijing is tun. Tokyo is tun. Paris is tun. Tun. On England is ak som tun. On se tun hatte Wintanchester.
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 God, Wintanchester. And ne wunath Oswald bera on Wintanchestre tune. Hui.
Oh.
Porthamte he on holte wunath. He wunath on holte. Ne wunath he on tune. On Wintanchestre tune. Ak. Hwa wunath on Wintanchestre. Ne wunath Oswald ak hwa. Se Kuning. Se Kuning wunath on Wintanchestre. Se Kuning. Se Kuning.
Se Kuning hat Charles.
Todayes Kuning hatte Charles. Och Ure Kuning in här hatte Adelrad. Adelrad. Se Kuning wunath on Wintanchestre. And where Sindonwe? Wintanchestre. Is se Kuning bera, Jonathan? Nese. Nis se Kuning bera. Se Kuning is where. Ich where. Du where. Right? Is ak where. And Adelrad Kuning is ak where. And what hatte se Kuning? Se Kuning hatte Adelrad. Adelrad is his nama. And is se Kuning weef? We have whereas Wheras, ich where, thu where. Ryan, Jonathan is ac where. Und weef. Och adelrad, nis adelrad weef. He is where. Se kuning, nis se kuning weef, he is where. Und what is weef? What is tonne weef? Se quen is weef. Se kuning is where, se quen is weef. Jise.
Quen is weef.
Sum weef wunath on wintanchastre, hua, se quen. Se quen is weef. Nis heo where, ac weef. On heo, se quen, wunath on wintanchastre.
Quen unath on wintanchastre?
Se quen wunath ac on wintanchastre.
Athelrad quen?
Athelrades quen. Jise, Athelrades quen.
Athelrades quen.
On what hatte se quen? Se quen hatte alfjivu.
Alfjivu.
Alfjivu is hirenama.
Hirenama.
Se kuning on se quen wuniath. Se kuning on se quen wuniath on wintanchastre. He wuniath on wintanchastre. Sele. Kuning is Sele. Sele is Michelhus. Jise, God. Und se kuning on se quen wuniath on wintanchastre ac Osweald bera wunath where? Where wunath Osweald bera, Jonathan?
On holte.
On holte. Soldice wunath he on holte.
On holte.
Und Ryan, wuniath se kuning on se quen on holte?
Nese.
Nese. Where wuniath he?
On wintanchastre.
On wintanchastre, soldice. On tune, on wintanchastre tune. God, well sidest du. Und wunath Osweald bera on tune, Jonathan? Nese. On ne wunath he on tune, he wunath where? On huse?
On holte.
On holte, soldice.
On holte.
Und hui wunath Osweald bera on holte. Hui.
Is bera.
Soldice. Osweald wunath on holte for thamthe he bera is. For thamthe he bera is.
For thamthe.
Wunath he on holte. On beran wuniath on holte. No, on tune.
Osweald wunath on holte for thamthe he bera is. Osweald wunath on holte for thamthe he is bera.
A bit of new English. There's a lot of flexibility in Old English word order.
Okay.
I am giving you the sort of default. So you will see both. But the more common structure would be Osweald wunath on holte for thamthe he bera is. Und jise. Osweald wunath on holte for thamthe he bera is. Adelrad wunath on tune for thamthe he kuning is. Und alfjivu wunath ac on tune on wintanchastre for thamthe heo quen is. Jise. So,
All
what do you
right.
think? Are
That
you
was
ready?
amazing.
Cast your minds back 1,000 years. You'll fit right in. You can start to time travel now, right?
I think I'm ready to sign up.
That's right. Spring.
Gold.
Here we go.
Besides it being an immensely fun like first chapter of a nature method textbook, which, dare I say it, grabs my attention even more than Roma in Italia is. I am even more impressed by real-time drawing and illustration of the chapter. That was awesome.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And I think one benefit of doing the real-time drawing is that it slows down the input. And so it not only slows down the input, because I can only, single task really,
Right.
but it also forces us to engage both the visual and the auditory
Right.
systems, and we're getting additional rich context that way.
Right. Jonathan, any thoughts?
I'm ready to see the full color illustration edition. This is great. I'm very excited about this project, and yeah, I think I'm also looking forward to seeing what questions we have from folks when we get to that point.
Yeah. Let's see. Just looking if there's questions for Colin in here.
Where did I go to art school? I trained under only the finest artists, as you can see.
Well, let's see. What would a student want to know if they were gonna jump into this? Would the class be run basically how you're running it, and then you'd kind of review the chapter after reading it together, just to try and solidify that in your mind?
So the way that I like to run these things is to, or at least with Old English, is to take the text and do extensive circling with it, like we were doing there.
Yeah.
And so I end every chapter with a list of, much like in Familia Romana, with a list of comprehension questions, which we can use to sort of solidify things. I'm also a fan of doing these little, I don't like to spend a ton of time. Well, I like to spend a ton of time on grammar on my own time, but I won't subject that to subject the students to that. But I'm not averse to spending a little time if a little bit of modern English will help clear something up, like we talked about with word order.
Right.
I think that there's just so much benefit to be gained by quickly getting a grammar point out of the way and then moving on, so that the vast majority of the time is in the target language.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Bruce, let's see, I'll pull it up. This resonates with me. It's a place in the back of my mind where many of the words are familiar. Yeah, I agree. I mean, some of it's like tune, what's tune? And then I see houses. I'm like, oh, town, city, something like settlement, something like that. Place where people live. And then ond and east, like some of the stuff is kind of obviously familiar, but even when I make that connection, like tune to town to habitation, whatever the best gloss of it is, it's like I don't even know about back of my mind. It's like deep in here, with English as my mother tongue. Like I'm accessing something really old that I have already in pieces inside of me. It's a kind of crazy feeling. It's
very fun. It's very fun when a lot of these words didn't survive as is into modern English. As some change their sound, some change their meaning a little bit. Sometimes you'll find a word that only survives in one dialect, or in a compound word, it doesn't survive on its own. And you get such a great view of the English language, which has this kind of dual quality of being familiar and at the same time strange. And I think that's a large part of the joy of Old English, if I can put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Manel Makar gives the impression if we just listened to Colin for a while, talking off the cuff, we'd eventually figure it all out. I mean, that's kind of what you're going to be doing.
That's the goal.
You're getting to listen and read, Colin. And yeah, I think you will. So when you figure it all out, I think, like you said, for a lot of people, figuring it all out would be like reading Beowulf, sitting down and reading the Old English and just like basking in it. In between Lapsy, or whatever this book ends up being called, and Beowulf, because I imagine you don't go 2 terms of Lapsy of this book and then go straight to Beowulf. I imagine there's intermediate steps of both adapted and unadapted Old English texts that you're going to have to spend some time with. What are those intermediate steps going to be?
The big intermediate step that I have in mind is the prose Beowulf.
Oh.
Which would be a rendering of Beowulf into prose. I guess there's truth in advertising after all. This is a great approach because for several reasons. One, if your goal is to read Beowulf in its original poetic form, you are going to have experienced the entire story before, right, which aids in comprehensibility. Because obviously a poem you're writing in verse, there's a higher bar. There are lots of vocabulary. There's lots of vocabulary that isn't used outside of poetry. There's a lot of stuff that gets monkeyed with in the grammar to make the meter work. So right, there are extra difficulties. Having the knowledge of the plot, and more than just the knowledge of the plot, the sort of an intimate knowledge of the text, albeit in a prose form, really helps when you get to the poetic form. So that's one. Number 2 is it's just a really ripping good yarn, and it's fun to read. And I think a lot of people, when they get into Old English, one of the goals they have in mind is to read Beowulf. And this is reading Beowulf in Old English. It's not reading exactly the lines, but you're so much closer. And I think it does a wonderful thing to motivation to have people following a continuous narrative like that.
Is the prose Beowulf an Anglo-Saxon era construction, or is it pedagogical?
It is pedagogical. So there exists currently a 19th century prosification of Beowulf called Beowulf's Seath, Beowulf's Journey, which tells the story of the first half of Beowulf in Old English prose. So my goal is to build on that, to bring it into line with the vocabulary and vocabulary sequencing that Lapsy uses, so that there's only ever a certain amount of new vocabulary at a time. Roughly in Lapsy, so Lingua, Anglica, Antiqua, per se Illustrata, Lapsy. In Lapsy, there is only ever about 50 new words introduced per chapter. Mm-hmm. And this is a kind of reasonable pace to be adding things. And so by the end of it, I'm not going to do arithmetic live on stream, but you have a good word hoard. You have a good store of vocabulary. And then when you go and to confront a prose Beowulf, I don't want there to be a difficulty cliff. I want it to feel fairly natural and easy. So there will need to be some reworking to fit the vocabulary progression. And I'd of course like it to go into the second half as well. So that still lies before me, but that would be roughly the second year curriculum.
Agreed.
I have a quick question about pronunciation. So you go to Greek land and there's blood in the streets, there's strife, and it's like, we should do this pronunciation, we should do that pronunciation. What's the state of or understanding of Old English pronunciation? Is there blood in the streets, or is it shalom all around?
There's blood in the academic streets about certain aspects of the reconstruction of Old English, specifically the vowels, which I think is probably not an uncommon thing. The vowels change usually more readily than consonants do, especially in the history of English. And there are more mysteries about the Old English vowels. I have used a a reconstruction that I find useful pedagogically. And that's something that I don't want to bore people with the details, but everything is based on rough consensus of the reconstructed phonology of Old English. However, there are probably things that individual scholars would object to, given their own reconstruction of something. But I think more or less, with the consonants, it's very clear what things were, almost for everyone except for maybe R. I've given that a trill. So yeah, I like to sidestep the blood in the streets and try and get to sort of the something that people can have in common. And if you meet someone else who speaks Old English, well, that's cool, first of all, but you'll have something that's not too far off from whatever they have learned.
Right. Yeah, and one thing I do want to say is this is a program under construction, but that's like all of our programs. Latin, Greek, Biblical Hebrew, everything we're doing is under construction in terms of looking for the best texts we can use at different levels to help students, looking for the best tools, the best resources we can support students with. So if this seems exciting, it's only going to get more exciting as kind of the adventures of Osweald continue, and we firm up the text itself, and we start adding art, and we start building tools to help with grammar and vocab. So yeah, that's very exciting. Where do you, Colin, and then where do you think students will find Old English most dissimilar from modern English, but also most challenging?
That's an interesting question. I think the place that is probably the most immediately different is in the inflection of nouns. So Old English is like Latin or ancient Greek. It is an older Indo-European language, and so it has a full complement of cases. See if I can find anything on screen. Right, so we have here on holte. So the word is holt, forest, and on holte we see the dative case. I don't know, I can't draw on this part of the screen, but we see the dative case on holte. And this is something that if you haven't studied a similar language before, if you haven't studied Latin before, Russian, or even modern German, this can be something that's quite different. But modern English does it too a little bit. So there's a foothold in your mind already. You're doing it every day if you speak modern English, whether you know it or not. And so it's not so hard to get into it once you get into the swing of things.
Sure.
But yes, Old English has a lot more inflection than modern English does, less than Latin does. So if you can sort of place it in terms of its morphological complexity, in terms of how many endings you have to stick onto the end of the words, it's somewhere in between modern English and Latin.
Great. Yeah, one encouragement I'd give students who are considering this, or really any language, is to study with us, or just to study. We're not the only place in the world where you can study language, obviously. Is the kind of terror you feel, and like I felt at the beginning, like, okay, on Holta, I have no idea what you're talking about. This is something we have to talk students down from in our classes a little bit. It's like, you just want me to read? And the answer is like, yeah. And it's a little scary at first, but I hope people could see that, you were asking us questions from the text, and sometimes we were just following along and reading the sentence that came after, because it's like, oh, presumably that's the answer. But sometimes, like, I really understood what you were asking me, and I was really understanding my correct response. And that's how you do it. And that's how this class is going to work. It's going to be really fun.
The thing that I sometimes give maybe my students know it's like a potted explanation, because I always come out with it and I start gesticulating. But I always think about the way that that watering a field works. So rain falls on a farmer's fields and irrigates the crops gradually, right? The crops need water, but not every little drop of rain gets absorbed by the soil and waters the plants. Some of that water flows off down into the stream. But nevertheless, at the end of the day, the plants are all growing. And that's exactly what's happening with the growth of the knowledge of the language in your own minds. So you're going to experience a lot of this language, and not every single aspect of every single sentence is going to necessarily click every single time. You do it enough times, you're there. So it doesn't matter if there's one word here that slipped by you, one word here that slipped by you. And one thing I always recommend is that repeated reading is extremely underrated. Because if you didn't get, say you got 60% of it the first time, go back, you'll get 70. Go back again, you'll get 80. And if it's a fun enough story, and I've tried to put in a few goofy things to keep people entertained, it's medicine that can go down relatively easily.
Yeah. In terms of Jonathan and I were just talking about this in a different context. In terms of the various kind of ancient language pedagogical texts, I think the beginner-ish book, Thrasymachus for ancient Greek, probably has the best sense of humor of any of the books. There's some jokes in the other ones, but Thrasymachus just feels really good nature. And this one does. I think this one's going to be very fun and funny. I mean, just starting with Osweald, it's evident that it's going to be. We have a really perceptive question that I'd like Colin to take a look at.
This is a good question.
At times, the pronunciation of the th sound was like there in some words and like thumb in others. Was it just my ears, or is it like modern English dependent on the word?
It is not just your ears, but neither is it dependent on the word. So the way it works in Old English is that if you have this, oops, I can't write on this, I keep forgetting. If you have this letter here, which is called thorn, and sometimes you'll have this letter, although I don't use it in the book, they're equivalent, incidentally. This is called eth. These make a sound like the modern English th, but as you've pointed out, there are two modern English th sounds. There's th as in thumb and the as in there. And in Old English, the difference between those two sounds is entirely dependent on the context in which it appears. So if you have the letter at question, the thorn letter, appearing in between two vowels or in between a vowel and an L or an R, you will get the sound. If you have it in any other context, you'll get the th sound. And actually, that also applies to the F letter, which shows up as a V in between vowels or beside a vowel and an L or R. And same with the S sound, which shows up as a Z when it's between vowels or next to an L or R and a vowel.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I've never, until this moment, thought about this. Are there rules for that in modern English? Or I just am doing it automatically?
See, what happened was the context in which the different variants appeared were lost. So what happened was we would have something like, let's see if I can come up with an example. See if I can come up with an example off the top of my head. Wolf and wolves. That's a good example where you have the F show up when it was at the end of a word, and then you have the V show up when there's some material after.
Okay.
So a lot of times because we've lost the context in which those things which determine the choice. I'll try and explain it a bit better. So say you have the rule is between vowels. Let's just simplify. So F is V in between vowels. F is V in between two vowels. And then you lose the second vowel of the word, but you still pronounce it V. Now it's no longer dependent on the context. Now it's just two separate sounds that you have to know. So that's what's happened in the history of modern English. There's a roundabout explanation of that.
No, that's helpful. Yeah, that's nice. Cool. Well, I think that's about it. Colin, any final thoughts?
Well, I hope we have some people in the audience whose interest is piqued to come study Old English in January. We'll have a lot of fun. We'll learn about what happens with this crazy bear and his adventures. There are Vikings. There are monks. There's all sorts of madness.
Great. Yeah, signups are live now, so there should be a link in the description underneath the video if you want to go sign up. We already have some people ready to go, so come join the party. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.